It's May the 19th, 2016. This is 508, a show about Worcester. Today in the show is Brendan Mellick
Oh, you forgot my name there for a second.
and Paul Dell'Aquila.
Paul Dell'Aquila.
Paul Dell'Aquila of the Central Massachusetts Regional Planning Commission, but today here as a private citizen, not representing anybody but himself.
Happy to be here.
Today we're here to talk about the Urban Redevelopment Plan for the City of Worcester. The Worcester Redevelopment Authority recently released this plan. It's talking about changes that may happen in a big chunk of downtown, 118-acre chunk of downtown and adjacent areas, not including City Square down there. Other stuff. Paul, how's it going?
It's going well, thanks.
Exciting
time in Worcester.
It is an exciting time in Worcester. What is the earliest that you remember this part back here on the Common?
You mean what's my earliest experience with the Common?
Yeah.
Oh, I suppose when I was a little kid, I would come down here, take the number 2 bus on Pleasant Street down to the old Galleria.
Yeah.
And go shopping with my grandmother back in the day. So that was probably my first experience coming down here. And that was early 80s.
And the biggest changes since then are probably landscaping out here and the tearing down of that mall over there?
Well, clearly. The configuration of the Common has been altered over the past several years. And, of course, the biggest difference is the lack of the monolith of the mall blocking Front Street.
You can see now there's sky, a road, a sense of freedom.
It was always there, but people didn't really know it until that was gone.
It's a pretty good feeling.
Absolutely.
Well, let's walk around City Hall. Here's Worcester City Hall, and we're just going to walk around this area and see, point in some buildings and talk about how the plan would impact them. This is just a tiny chunk of the stuff that is slated to be redeveloped, but it's maybe stuff that's familiar to a lot of people in Worcester. I think the first thing we can talk about is this building right here, which I think is slated for facade repairs.
That looks like it'd be a good candidate for facade repairs, that's for sure.
Yeah, and I'm trying to think of when, if I even wrote down when these facade repairs would happen. Maybe I didn't.
Next to the Midtown Mall?
Maybe I didn't. Yeah, I think that this narrow one here, I think actually this building too is also slated
Paul, you
for
know
a
this better than I do. I'm told that the history of this building and the reason it's so funny and narrow compared to everything else is that used to be where the light rail ran through. When the light rail was replaced or taken up, that was.
So this used to be an alley where the rail went
That's
through.
my understanding. Could be just weird local folklore, but yeah, that was. Yeah.
Honestly, I haven't heard that one before, but if we look at some old maps, I'm sure you can see some old rights-of-way and you can possibly piece that back together. Yeah.
Well, next to this building that's scheduled for facade repair or planned to have facade repair is the Midtown Mall. And I gotta say, Midtown Mall is certainly not the biggest piece that's affected by this plan. But Paul, This is the thing that most people have talked to me about.
Sure.
Knowing that I read this plan, which is, I guess, more educated than anyone else they know about this thing, they're like, what's going to happen with the Midtown Mall? The Midtown Mall, the Midtown Mall. Not a building that I personally am attached to at all.
Yeah, it's never been a beloved building in downtown Worcester, it seems. I have some vague memories of, again, that era in the early 80s when there was some activity in the mall. I think there was a comic book store in here.
I was going to say, I was also a number 2 bus guy, and this is where we used to come because that was the Silver Ball arcade. So
okay.
I can't remember what the name of the one in the Galleria was.
The Dream Machine.
Dream Machine.
Yeah.
The Silver Ball was over here where the dress shop is now, and that's all I see even now when I look at it, is just the same glass windows, but it was just huge arcade room and whatnot. And that, again, 80s, which is funny to think about because that was also the height of the crack epidemic and the height of violent crime in Worcester. But as a 10-year-old kid, my parents had no problem putting me on the bus and sending me downtown. Whereas now, today's a rarity because I think every police officer in the city is here. But normally it's kind of devoid of activity.
Yeah. Well, I gotta say, even though you say that this is not a beloved building, I know a guy who went so far as to get married in the Midtown Mall. So
I didn't say it wasn't an interesting building. One of the interesting things about it is that it spans a whole city block. You can connect from the side of Front Street back over to Mechanic Street.
Right.
So from an urban pedestrian experience standpoint, this area is an important link.
Because you can walk right through the block through the Midtown Mall.
Absolutely.
So this building, we can talk a little bit about this. It's on the list. It was originally built in 1941 as a Woolworths. Now, of course, it's the Midtown Mall. And it's a high priority on the list, which means they're hoping within the next 0 to 5 years, they could get the owners to sell it to somebody who would do a bunch of rehab on it. And then it would change from a retail commercial space to a space which would be retail on the ground floor, commercial on the upper floor, and the basement, I guess. According to this report, it's mostly where a lot of the first floor retail space in there is being used for storage, and it's kind of empty on the other floors.
Do something with the Midtown Mall?
I don't know. Maybe somebody will. This guy's asking about the Midtown Mall.
Absolutely. See, it's a hot topic these days. But that's my understanding. I have to confess I've not been in the upper levels of this building, but my understanding is it's used predominantly for storage and it's underutilized space. So I think that's what is definitely one of the definitions contained in the plan. I know the city's looking at buildings that are not fully occupied, not fully developed, especially on the upper levels.
I wanted to ask you, so this plan talks about this building being transferred, which I guess means sold, and then rehabbed. When a building like this, which is mildly historic from the 40s at least, when a building like this is rehabbed, if it says that in the plan, what does that usually mean?
Well, it could mean a number of things. When I think of a rehab of a building, it could mean an adaptive reuse. That's often what we talk about when we're talking about downtown urban revitalization kind of ideas. If you're not knocking something down, you're revitalizing it. You are doing some facade enhancements as well. But
are you preserving the existing facade?
Well, I'm not. Again, not being a architectural historian, I can't tell you the condition of what's there now. I think it is aesthetically, it is interesting from here. I can't tell you about the condition.
Yeah, it's got a little unique carving and stuff in there.
But I think in terms of that, I mean, wasn't a lot of attention on the aesthetics that I saw. I think it's more about the uses.
Yeah.
And that they're trying to activate the buildings as much as they can.
Yeah.
So if they can creatively reconfigure the spaces in there, I think they're going to attract a different array of retail options.
Yeah. I have to say, like, again, from people who I've talked to, the aesthetics are, because it's just a sentimental thing, the aesthetics are of prime importance. So it's like, it doesn't matter if there's an arcade in there or a clothing store in there or whatever the heck else would go in there. It's mostly just like, does it look like it was recently renovated in 1962? Right. That's kind of what people are worried about.
I think with a lot of the buildings that are contained in this area would fall into that category. They maybe have not been as taken care of as some other buildings, but with a little bit of extra investment, you can make it much more attractive, especially with the influx of other investment that's going on down here, more residential, more students, thus more foot traffic and more demand, hopefully, for those kind of retail needs.
I have a related question, actually. This is another, like, maybe real estate 101 question.
Okay.
So this building is assessed at $2.5 million, and the replacement cost is listed as $5 million. Does that imply that there's $2.5 million of repairs that need to happen in this building?
I couldn't tell you that. I'm not an assessor. But
okay.
I think what it is, what the gist of that is this property has probably not been kept up over the last couple of decades. So at this stage of the game, any rehab with electrical, plumbing, whatever else, needs to be a much more complicated job.
Yeah.
A lot of it goes into code compliance as well too, and that's one of the downsides of letting a building go so long without any updating. Is you've got now decades of code compliance that you need to navigate through, and sometimes that gets to the point where financially it's just not a feasible job anymore.
That's when you end up tearing it down, because you're like, it's easier to build it from scratch up to code rather than modifying it.
Non-real estate professional, that's the thing that always breaks my heart, right? Because one of the things that's great about downtown Worcester is we still have that. I mean, you look at pictures of what downtown was like in the 40s and the 50s when we did have a lot of street-level commerce and whatnot. The look is still here in some capacity, and you can envision it wouldn't be too hard to bring it back. But unfortunately, some of these buildings have been left to rot for so long, getting to the point where they could be repurposed and still have that aesthetic that carries back a few generations. It's kind of hard to balance the two.
We can't talk about the Midtown Mall without talking about eminent domain. This is a building which the people across the street in City Hall have been complaining about for a long time, that it's underutilized, it's not maintained properly. They feel like
they do look at it right out the window every day.
They know
having a neighbor that isn't mowing their lawn.
They know it better than me. They look at it a lot more than I ever do. But so they're talking in the report about eminent domain maybe having to be used on some of these. This is another question I would ask you: is whenever you read about people mentioning eminent domain in a report, is this just something people mention as a matter of course, or does this mean that you only say it when you're serious?
Well, that's a good question. I can't speak to what some of the city folks' intentions were when they mentioned that in the report, but I can tell you from a planning perspective, eminent domain has been very controversial, especially in recent years.
Yeah.
And it's not generally speaking, not that we don't avoid controversy, we're not afraid of controversy, but you get into delicate matters of property rights and family heritage on sites. And so without getting into that, it often we look at it as a last resort, and it's usually done in situations where buildings, as we talked about just a few minutes ago, they're too far gone to really do too much with.
Yeah.
I think in in the case of this new urban revitalization plan, I think it probably is on some level a message to some of the other owners that we're serious about doing something here. So I think my impression is the city hopes to be working with some of these owners now that they're potentially concerned with the specter of down the road of eminent domain. I don't know what specific buildings are first on the list or not, but I imagine.
Well, this is in phase 1. This is in 0 to 5 years.
So if I was a property owner and I saw that, I would definitely want to contact the city and find out what I can do to begin to avoid that process.
I have to say, Brendan, as Worcester's libertarian voice, I feel like we have to come out strongly against eminent domain. The Midtown Mall is a building which it looks quirky. I'm always disappointed when I go in there. So the idea of changing it in a big way seems great to me. Eminent domain always rubs me the wrong way.
And I think rightfully so. That I think the natural reaction that anyone should have, the idea of government taking property in any form, should be just that. But that said, there's a flip side, and that's the responsibility of being a property owner. And whether it's residential or commercial, I mean, you do have responsibilities when it comes to property. There's no question that over the last few decades, there are probably some good arguments to be made that it was not the right time to be sinking massive amounts of cash in redeveloping property. Right. Not only because there's clearly a lot happening here that could have impacted other properties along the way as the City Square project kind of came together. Mm-hmm. But now we're at a point where there's two things in play. This is kind of settled in terms of both ownership, City Square.
City Square, not this car, City Square.
Not the car. I mean, that City Square is kind of settled in terms of its footprint and where it's going from both a design and planning perspective. But also, you have to look at the larger economics outside of Worcester, and that just comes down to the cost of money, right? So if the cost of borrowing money is relatively inexpensive or near nothing at this point, there aren't a lot of good excuses left not to be making the kind of lending that would make redevelopment feasible.
Right.
And again, I'm kind of with you in the, last resort makes everyone uncomfortable. It definitely scratches a weird part of your brain. But as a collective entity, right, and not a libertarian voice, we need to be kind of looking out for our collective best interests and recreating a local economy of scale. It needs to be priority one, and that's only going to happen if we start taking care of the properties we have that define the downtown commerce area of the city.
Let's keep walking.
Which one?
We're going to keep going around here. Thanks. So this property next door to the Midtown Mall, which is 12 Front Street, is also on the top of the list, to be rehabbed in 0 to 5 years. A similar situation. They say, listen, we want you to sell this to somebody who's going to put money into it, or we want you to put some serious money into it. Right now, it is retail on the ground floor, commercial and office mostly vacant on the upper floors, and their plan is to make it retail on the ground floor and commercial on the upper floors. Any comments on 12 Front Street?
If I understand the ownership correctly, it's the same owners as the Midtown Mall, building here. And so it's a similar situation, to my understand. They've had retail on the ground floor of different caliber over the years, but you just look at the facade of this building, it clearly hasn't been upgraded. When you look just next door to it at Harrington Corner, that building has been nicely cleaned and rehabbed in recent years. Right next door.
That's this building on the corner, Harrington Corner.
Correct, the Weston Sampson Harvard Pilgrim Dunkin' Donuts building there. But, there's multiple eras of architectural history looking at this facade. You have some of the original facade near the top. You have sort of this 60s, 70s, applique in the middle.
Yeah.
And then you have the contemporary retail on the bottom here.
And this building's from 1851, whereas this building's from 1941. Mm-hmm. So there's a long time separating them, but they're both sort of the same weird mishmash of stuff on the outside, at least.
It's not uncommon in many older cities. It's over the years, buildings get repurposed and used for different things, and 100, 150 years later, as we said, the code's different, the needs of retailers and offices are different, and if the properties aren't maintained and invested in, they can become a drag on the neighborhood around it.
Let's keep walking.
Hey Mike, this one's probably an even better example just from a street level perspective than the Midtown Mall.
Come closer to the camera while you're talking.
If you're looking the businesses that are in here, I mean, some of the best tacos in the city right now.
Toledo's awesome place. Everybody should go there.
Like Lily's, it might not be everybody's cup of tea, but I challenge you, even if it's not your cup of tea, to walk to the back room. It's an art gallery in there. It is 2 rooms full of hand-blown glassware for a very specific purpose.
We're talking about smoking weed.
It's incredibly expensive, what they have in there. With a new facade and an updated building, you would have people streaming in there because it's quite literally an art gallery. but there's only so much that you can get out of a building when it looks that way. And in terms of neighboring tenants and whatnot, the facade is what's drawing you in. So, like, as people are driving by right now, let's assume any one of these cars has somebody in it who's interested in investing in Worcester. They're going to keep driving by because that's not the building that they want to be neighboring.
Let's keep going. Let's keep going. We can talk while we walk, but let's keep going. And here's Harrington Corner we were talking about here on the side. Actually, I'm going to run up to the corner here because over here we have the Olympic Theater. So this is a building which is actually on the list to be taken and demolished, or bought and demolished. Not this building and not this beautiful building next to it, which is the old Oddfellows Hall, but the building that we can't see over there, which was built in 1890 as Lothrop's Opera House, has been the Olympia Theater in recent years. This is demolishing and rebuilding. This is way down the line, 10 to 20 years from now. I don't know. It's sort of sad to think about a theater space going away, but
Absolutely. I mean, it's a very interesting. I haven't had the benefit of being inside the building, but you look at the exterior, and it's quite interesting. It's very architecturally appealing. Oop, we have a friendly ambulance here.
this is what it's like taping in downtown Worcester.
We're in a city here. We don't know. This isn't Holden. So, so I can't speak to that. But I mean, again, it's the kind of, if you look at an aerial of this block, that particular building is nicely configured to provide linkage over to Pearl Street, to the upper part of that side of downtown. So there's potentially some opportunities you can enhance that, develop it. It's hard to say. But anytime there are interesting architectural resources that are lost, it is a shame. But sometimes, frankly, some things can't be redone.
Yeah.
I can't speak to this particular case, but cities are in constant state of change. But I think the ones that do the best are the ones that can incorporate the best parts of the past and carry them forward into making the area more vibrant for the future.
Brendan, you've been in the theater building in recent decades, at least, right?
No, not when it was the Olympia. I've seen pictures of it very recently, because the owner has started doing some renovations inside,
Right.
and it's actually some really interesting stuff. They lifted out. Apparently, there were old drop ceilings that were in there that when it was the Olympia or the New Art Theater, whatever it was most recently called. I think it was the New Art Theater, Porn Theater. When it was a porn theater, it had like drop ceilings and everything was kind of sealed up and whatnot. They've brought it back to what it was like when it was the Olympia. It's not 100%, but it's pretty close to where somebody who is interested, from what I understand in the pictures I've seen, it's pretty close to where somebody could come in and start working through a smaller theater space. So yeah, it's another property. All of these properties are amazing on a couple different levels. I can't remember when Blue was up there, but the previous owners of the club next to Tammany Hall,
right.
was multiple floors. A lot of work went in there, and those spaces were gorgeous. We don't know if they meet code now, don't know if they were mothballed properly when they were shuttered, but this lower Pleasant Street end, there's some great potential in buildings, but again, if they weren't taken care of, what else you got?
Let's keep going. We got so much ground to cover. City Hall is not on the list, although we can mention that this whole plaza out here has been redone in a big way in recent years. And I don't know, all of these changes, I'm always sort of against every change that ever is proposed, but frequently the results are nice, and I think the results out here are nice. It is a better space to walk down. It feels a little bit less claustrophobic and weird.
Well, not to throw out cliches, but the only constant is change. So the city is always evolving, and it's a question of what direction does it evolve to.
Yeah. So the next thing we're going to talk about is the Denholm building, and I guess this used to be way before my time, a department store, right?
It was before my time as well. My understanding, it was one of the grand department stores in the city. And if you go in, you can kind of see how the escalator is configured. You could see where multiple different floors of retail were configured back in the day.
Yeah, like a true department store where it was each floor, each section was broken up into very specific, almost independent sort of entities. But yeah, Denholm's was quite the thing. Some great photos out there. People want to Google around and look for its history. It wasn't just a drab old building. It was a beautiful storefront that was kind of the hub of downtown commerce for a long period of time.
So the Denholm building is on a sub-list of this report called Selective Acquisition. The idea is to change things within the next 5 to 10 years here. And selective acquisition meaning that a lot of the ground floor spaces are actually operated on a sort of condo level where people own these little places in here, and their goal is to get somebody to buy these spaces and then improve everything, change everything, still make it, some mixture of retail and commercial. But they just feel like it's underused now, and I guess just not built the way they want it to be built.
Well, this is a key location in downtown, and you would want to have the spaces down here as active as possible. It provides a direct link to what's going on this side of the Common and City Hall, down towards the theater district that way.
Yeah.
And so, if you can activate these spaces even more, it will provide a very valuable linkage.
Let's cross the street unless this ambulance is turning here. No, he is turning here. Let's do it anyway. Just because I want to get a closer look at two lots next to the Denholm building, which are going to be changed. One is this parking lot next door to the Denholm building. This parking lot is on the really long list, like the 10 to 20 year list, to acquire this parking lot and change it into something better. The Money Stop, which is this building sort of here next to the parking lot. I don't know how far we want to walk down. We're kind of running low on time. The Money Stop is a circa. Oh man, let me see what it is. Sorry. Is it Money Stop or Metro PCS?
The Money Stop is that one in the corner.
I may have confused what's on one side and what's on the other one. The Money Stop is a circa 1894 building called the Ransom F. Taylor Block.
The building is
Actually,
18.
oh.
The Money Stop, I think, is only
It's a bit more recent.
Yeah.
Well, and I should say, even though this parking lot is 10 to 20 years, this Money Stop is also on the priority list in the next 0 to 5 years to acquire it, to connect the interiors, to turn the upper floors, or to acquire it, to turn it from a retail and restaurant and vacant space to a retail and commercial space, and to get the billboard out the top. On this side, the Metro PCS, which I keep confusing with the Money Stop, and the Great Wall, these buildings are also on the list. These buildings are also 1800s buildings, 1855 and 1894, or no, 1855 and 1870.
Filene's, right? Is that what used to be on the corner there?
Oh, I'm not sure. Well, this one, I'm not sure if it was a Filene's or not,
I think the
actually.
last end of the building
Maybe the
was,
very last one,
was
perhaps.
Filene's, yeah.
So these two buildings are going to be
One
changed.
that's condos now. But
Let's see if we can zip around the side here and at least make it to the Paris before we run out of time.
But again, the similar issue with these buildings we just saw, the bones of those buildings are great, and the location are great, but if the upper floors aren't fully activated, if what retail does exist is not serving the population that's down here, that's in the heart of the theater district right there.
Mm-hmm.
You're not going to go to the Money Stop before you go see a show at the Hanover, more than likely.
Right.
So I think that's in that neighborhood in particular, they're looking to definitely increase the uses to provide more options for patrons of the theater district and some of the other offices and buildings that are slated to be going on down there.
This building we can mention, this is the old Telegram and Gazette building, which has been, who did this? The Worcester Business Development Corporation or somebody did this?
WBDC was heavily involved with the renovation and cleaning up of this building.
So it's like a co-working space down here on the ground floor. There's a bunch of offices of some sorts of visionary and otherwise hip organizations.
The architectural elements might not be everybody's cup of tea, but a great example of what can be done in a very short period of time in terms of facade updates. They also obviously did a lot of work inside too for anyone that's been there.
It looks great.
The exterior is the part that catches people's eyes, and this block it's been relatively well maintained. The other side of Portland, not so much. And standing on the Common, it's very easy to see that difference between the set of properties that have been touched and not a super heavy touch, just touched, versus the ones that I think the grid properties down here are getting close, and hopefully it becomes something that's a little bit more continuous. But same down by the Money Stop. You do have the Hanover and some adjacent buildings that have been beautified over the years. Facades are fantastic. That building from the outside, it's mostly a coat of paint. And how much is it to ask? That gets taken care of, right? For the folks that invested the kind of money they did and the resources that went into the Hanover and the adjacent buildings, to then realize that your neighbor isn't going to paint the building and it's just going to let it fall, literally let paint fall off the facade.
Let's keep walking, guys.
If I could amplify where we're
Yeah.
doing that, some of the activity going on in this old T&G building is a good exemplar of what we call the creative economy.
Right.
And that's, I can tell you in my professional hat, we're going to be working on a study and the creation of a regional creative economy toolkit. So that's one of the types of examples of the kind of things we want to see. Smaller, nimbler startup kind of entities, and especially since we are looking at more tech-based things, more student-based, recent grad kind of based activities. That's the kind of model that's going to be successful to reuse some of these spaces down here.
This is amazing. This gentleman's cafe, barbershop, billiard room, sort of engraved stone design. The Bancroft here. This is a Bancroft lobby renovations in progress. Good. The Bancroft, amazing looking outside, not always so great inside.
No, I think back it was originally a hotel back in the day, if I'm not mistaken. And I remember the old Eden restaurant that was in the bottom there. My grandparents' 50th wedding anniversary ball was held there. I remember it clearly.
Here we are
Well,
crossing
Fulton Street
Portland.
Lane is another example, I think, where things are being touched, and you can see really quickly how that progress is starting to shape up in a meaningful way. The facade work that's being done all the way down to the printers building, and we know from talking to the folks at Technocopia, and I hope we can get back in there sometime soon. The whole printers building is also getting an upgrade.
Yeah, that's true. We should mention to people there's a maker space in there and a youth education space that just moved in there. A subscription-based, I guess, like wood shop in there. Let's go down the Paris.
Creative economy again.
There you go.
Some of these underutilized spaces are better tailored, not for offices or dentists, but for artists and creators.
We get this coffee place.
Too much to ask, right? Is that like there's a cafe going in? No offense to the Dunkin' Donuts folks and the Honeydew folks. I'm sure I will still be grabbing coffee from you too. But having another cafe, there's one a little bit further down the other side of the Hanover. But having another cafe just adjacent to the Common is going to be huge and complementary to everything else that's happening here.
We stopped suddenly because we come here at 266 Franklin Street, built in 1926 as the Capitol Theater. In recent years, the Paris Cinema, also a porn theater. Brendan?
And also, folks will remember that signage from the night that we spent some time bidding on the Paris Cinema sign. We didn't win that auction.
We were
but
the
we came
only
very
media
close.
outlet that covered the auction
And
of the Paris Cinema sign, and attempted
remotely,
to get it, but
yeah.
we didn't get it. But this is also on the first buildings, or the first things on the list in the next 0 to 5 years, to acquire it, to demolish it, to make the first floor office and the upper floor commercial, and maybe, is there a third floor here, residential too?
I can see it. Well, given looking at what's adjacent to it, these are 3-4 story buildings. This is like a 2.5 story building. So any new structure would probably want to match the same roof line to create a common aesthetic.
Okay.
And I imagine the developers of these, the grid district, would like to see that sort of a jagged tooth in their facade right now. I'm sure they'd like to either pull it out or paint it back up. But my understanding, this is not as intact of a structure as perhaps one of the other the Olympic Theater up the road.
Okay.
So I think it would limit. My understanding is that it would be harder to reconfigure it for modern theatrical kind of use.
Let's go down here to the corner, because I think we got like 2 more things. We got 2 more minutes, and we can just point out. One is all of this stuff over on this other side of the street is not part of this redevelopment plan. It's all going to be big buildings and parks and parking lots and things. This church here currently slated to be torn down, Notre Dame. We'll see what happens with that. The last thing is here, of course, across the street we have the library, and the library parking lot has been something that some people, I feel like other than the Midtown Mall, the weirdos that I talk to care about the library parking lot down there, because the library is a really, well-used institution. According to this plan, it seems like the library parking lot would be acquired, reconfigured to be a plaza. It would be turned into buildings. It never says explicitly that there will be no parking. I think the implication is there would be no parking there.
I think the implication is that probably the parking will be reconfigured and might be put into a structure.
Yeah.
Generally speaking, from an urban theory standpoint, when you have a dense core downtown, a surface parking lot is not considered the highest and best use.
Yeah.
Now, I am, as a library patron, I want easy access to the library. But at the same time, I can see the development potential if it's done consistent with some of the theater district work and some of the work that's coming this way from City Square. That also, on the far other side of, Myrtle Street over there, or the revitalization plan does identify that area as a potential future growth area of downtown.
And that's all way down.
That'd be longer term.
This is all 5 to 10 years for the plaza and 10 to 20 for Myrtle Street. Guys, we're out of time. We're literally out of time. Paul Dell'Aquila, thanks for being on the show. Brendan Melican, thanks for being on the show. I'm Mike Benedetti. You at home, thanks for watching the show. If you have complaints, email us pieandcoffee@gmail.com. We'll see you next week.
Thanks, Mike.